Why do you seem so scared? All I wanted to do was play with you.
Welcome to Terror Tracks, hosted by best-selling horror author Jack Pierce. We publish new episodes every Monday at 2 a.m. EST. Go to terrortracks.com/shop if you would like to support the show, and follow us on social media at terrortracks.com/follow. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to Terror Tracks. Hope you're having a wonderful Monday morning. In this series, you will hear frightening tales that I have written for you, starting with my best-selling, most critically acclaimed story to date, Under a Morning Star. Today will only be chapter 1 of many, but in each episode, I will give you a recap of the previous episode so you won't be lost. After the story is concluded in this episode, I'll be reviewing Season 1, Episode 1 of Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of the Phantom Cab. Every week, you will hear a new chapter from Under a Morning Star or one of my other books, and a new review of an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark in order of release. Without further ado, welcome to Terror Tracks.
Chapter 1. Drova SBI Headquarters. "Detective Levin, in my office now!" Chief Lewis yelled. I walked through the SBI office to see what good old hothead wanted this time. Chief Lewis was always a prick. All he really needed was to pull the stick out of his ass once in a while, but I'd never tell him that. Worst of all, his cigar smoke choked everyone that went in there. "We've reopened the Norcastle mass murder case," Chief Lewis said, biting down on another cigar. "The murder capital of the country? Lovely. Don't toy with me. After your last few mishaps, I'm losing my patience." I lit a cigarette and winked at him. "We should meet up after work for some dinner. My treat." He puffed on his cigar a few times, leering at me with those big, bloodshot eyes. I thought about bringing turtle wax in one day to polish that shiny dome of his. If the Chinese takeout didn't put him 6 feet under, his blood pressure surely would. I loved to rile him up. He always gave me this glare like he wanted to tear my head clean off, but I knew he never would. I had too much dirt on him. "Shut up, Levin. Go solve that case and get Norcastle out of your head. You grew up there. You know it better than anyone. Go see Dr. Moore before you leave." I smiled at him. Not the vacation spot I'd choose, but beggars can't be choosers. Chief ran his hand on the top of his head and slammed the door behind me as I walked out of his office. I walked next door to see Dr. Moore. Moore was a middle-aged man with short brown hair and a trimmed beard. He was the best psychiatrist in Drova. The best I knew, anyway. It's not like the chief was going to give us an allowance to see an outside shrink. I straightened out my suit and knocked on the door. "Come in," Moore said. I walked inside and sat down looking at all of his diplomas to pass the time. Moore dug through his notes, making a few scribbles here and there. "Can you get me out of this assignment?" I asked. Dr. Moore leaned back, holding on to his torn armrests. He stayed there for a moment and sighed. "Not this again. We've been talking about Norcastle all year," Moore said, rubbing his temples. "So that's a no? Every method we've tried thus far has given bad side effects." "I know, Doc, but is sending me back really going to help? It's like sending a Vietnam vet back to the jungle. Why do we have to do this every time, Rick? I just think it's bullshit. I mean, there are tons of other cases. Gordana had some disappearances. Maelstrom is full of lunatics. Hell, even Drova has its fair share of perps. That's enough." Dr. Moore looked me in the eye and leaned forward on his worn-out desk. I had never seen him like this. He always seemed relaxed. I never believed in all this therapy nonsense either. My only issue was insomnia. God knows the other detectives weren't going to lose their beauty sleep. I always got the calls at 3 a.m. to investigate the crime scenes. If any of the others ever went, I'd hear an earful the next morning from Chief Lewis. They'd use me as a doormat if they could. "I know it's going to be difficult, and if you have some kind of bad reaction, call me. Here's my card," Moore said, handing me his business card. "Doc, look, I can't do this right now. I have other cases on my desk. It's this, or Chief will put you on administrative leave. I tried to talk him out of it, but he won't budge. I have done everything in my power to help you. I feel for you. I really do. But at this point, we don't have any other options. You have to go back, Moore said. I stormed out and headed down the hall toward the stairs. Going back to Norcastle didn't feel right. I never wanted to see that town's hideous face again. The phones rang off the hook at every desk. At least I got the sweet sound of silence away from the phones and Chief's constant screaming. This assignment was the hardest I had ever dealt with. I dreaded every moment leading up to my inevitable departure. "Hey, Rick, wait," Dyson said. I stopped at my ex-partner's desk. Dyson had just turned 55. He'd been part of the SBI since I was in diapers. When I joined the force, he showed me the ropes. He had a thick country accent, pot-belly, and a rough beard. "So what did Chief want this time?" Dyson asked. "I have to go to Norcastle. They won't let me out of it this time. I keep kicking the can down the road, but what am I going to do?" "You better be careful out there. It's dangerous." "Tell me something I don't know." "Are you going to be okay?" "I don't know. I have to go and try to solve a 10-year-old murder case that has no leads, no suspects, and not a damn clue from anyone. I don't see the point." "Neither do I, man, but at least you get away from the Chief." "That's true." I stood up and walked out of the precinct to the parking deck. This was it. I was going back to home sweet hell. I opened a pack of Marlboro Reds and fired one up. A young woman leaned against my car. She was one of those goth types, black baggy pants with chains and a black miniskirt halfway covered by a dark hoodie. She was around 5'6" and 120 pounds soaking wet. She looked around the parking lot aimlessly. Typical street punk type. I figured she was waiting for her junkie boyfriend to come out. "Excuse me, are you waiting for someone?" "No. Is this your car?" "Yeah." "I'm sorry. I hope I didn't scratch it." She put out her cigarette on her boot heel and moved. I gave her a polite smile and got in my Crown Victoria. I wasn't supposed to smoke in the car, new city policy. But what were they going to do, arrest me? It wasn't the sexiest car. Not like the state police who drove Corvettes to catch people going 20 over the limit. It was at least incognito. My blue lights sat on the dashboard, and there were no protruding antennas. The girl came up to my window and knocked. "Hey, I'm sorry to ask, but are you going by Mario's Pizza on North Street?" North Street was on the way back to my apartment. Muggers, rapists, gangs of thugs all roamed that area. I dealt with them all the time. Terrible sights that will always be burned into my memory forever. It's a wonder that all cops aren't emotional train wrecks. Maybe we were, but some hit it better than others. "Yeah, sure. Hop in," I said. She smiled and got in. She avoided direct eye contact and didn't say much. I looked up at the sky and said, "It's about to rain." She smiled and looked down. "Yeah, I didn't notice, but when it rains I can use my hood," she said. "Then you'd catch a cold. I'd hate to see that happen to a pretty girl like you." She blushed and said, "My name is Starr. I'm Detective Rick Levin, SBI. Nice to meet you." Her eyes darted around the car and she trembled. "No need to be scared. You're in good hands." "Okay," she said. "So what were you doing at the precinct? Waiting for someone?" "No, I just wanted to stop for a smoke. It's been a bad day. I figured it would be the safest place to stop." "Tell me about it. I just got the worst case of my life dumped in my lap. Chief is trying to drive me to drink." "Oh? What case?" "I've got to go to Norcastle. It's a shithole." "Be careful in Norcastle." "Oh yeah? Why's that? You been there recently?" "No, I just know a lot of bad things have happened there recently." "Don't worry, I can hold my own." We pulled up to Mario's Pizza and parked at the corner. "Here you go. Stay safe," I said. Starr got out of the car smiling and said, "Thank you." "No problem. Here's my card. Call me if anything happens." Starr snickered and said, "Thanks, I will." I hoped she'd be all right getting home. I contemplated waiting outside and giving her a ride home, but I had no time to wait. Chief needed me to leave for Norcastle as soon as possible. I got back onto North Street and pulled up to my apartment complex on West 52nd Street. I parked in my usual spot near the fence in the very back of the lot. The thought was no one would try to steal the car this far in. It had worked so far. I took one last drag and flicked it out the window before keying the engine off. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I looked like shit. No sleep and no sanity. I rubbed my eyes with my hand and tried to forget creeping thoughts of Norcastle I'd buried long ago. After a minute or two, I got out and went into my apartment complex through the side door. The main entrance always had a few drug dealers hanging around the steps. I was in no mood to deal with them today. I got in the old elevator and it slowly started up to my floor. After it screeched for a while, the doors opened. I walked down the hall to my door and went inside. I dropped my keys on the end table and turned on my old rusty lamp. It didn't look like anyone had broken in. It's not like there was much to steal. All I had was a futon, a few guitars, and 4-day-old takeout in the fridge. It wasn't Buckingham Palace, but it was mine. I put my life on the line for the public, and the chief never gave me a raise. Sure, he would give me a cheap medal, but give me $1 extra an hour? Shit! That cheap prick fired anyone who asked for one. I opened my laptop and logged into Trax's website. The prices had gone up in recent months, because of the summer season. I put in my ticket number and decided to leave at 3 a.m. I didn't have much choice. The next train going there was in a week after tomorrow. I never could figure out what would cause such mayhem back in Norcastle. After my neighbors were murdered, I got the hell out of Dodge. I wondered why Chief put me on this case. It's been 10 years. It's not like bringing it back up will help anyone. To be honest, I thought we should have left it cold. Let the dead rest in peace. The futon frame creaked as I laid it out flat. It had the sweet smell of sweat and shame. Before long, it was going to give way, and I'd have a spring up my ass. I could see the headlines now. Cop dies from a spring up the ass. You laugh now, but it would have sold like hotcakes. Plus, lugging a new futon up 4 flights of stairs didn't seem too appealing after working 12 to 16-hour shifts. The precinct had bunks that I could have slept in. More comfortable than my futon, but I couldn't sleep naked there. The best I could do there was sleep in a pair of slacks and a white beater undershirt. After working the usual 12-hour shift, I'd go to Mario's, go home, and by the time I tried to go to sleep, the phone rang. Then I was up for another few hours writing notes from a tip the victims thought of. Cops are never off duty. Your phone stays on 24/7, and most of us were lucky to get 3 hours of sleep a night. Most nights, I couldn't sleep at all. I thought about the victims I met throughout the day. The worst is when I had to tell a mother and her crying children their father was dead from a mugging gone awry. I started to doze off and my phone rang. I put the pillow over my face and screamed, hoping the ringing would stop. The caller ID read Dyson. I didn't want to answer it, but once again, if I refused to answer the phone, Chief would give me a lecture. Hello? Hey, buddy, Dyson said. What's going on, man? That Norcastle place is fucked up, brother. I didn't want to tell you at the precinct in front of anyone. I keep hearing about people going through there and going crazy. Make sure you take your pills. If you need me, call me. I'll be stuck in this shithole while you're gone on a wild goose chase. Yeah, thanks. I'm going to get some sleep. Keep in touch. Hey, wait, one more thing. Yeah, what? There's a rumor about something called the Red Reaper in Norcastle. What the hell is a Red Reaper? I don't know. Just some guy who was traveling through there caught footage on his dash cam of someone on a rooftop with a giant red scythe. Shit. I'll keep my eyes peeled then. Be careful out there. We're all counting on you. Thanks. I'll call you later. Bye. I drifted off around 9 p.m. Got a few hours of sleep, 3 at best. I grabbed my travel mug filled with cheap instant coffee and headed out the door. The traffic was heavy with everyone on their way home from the baseball game. The Drova Falcons versus Kent Blue Devils. It took almost 20 minutes to cut into West Broad Street. The horns honked and people screamed out of their windows. Hey, move your ass! I heard one particularly angry driver scream. Friendly bunch of people, good old Drova. The beautiful symphony of screaming idiots and horns blaring every day in traffic. Seemed like the only day without a traffic jam was the day that didn't end in Y. My coffee was stale. It tasted more like gravel and dog turds than actual coffee. The sound of car horns and crazed sports fans gave me a massive headache. Downtown was filled with skyscrapers full of offices. The workers all looked miserable. The day-to-day grind of paperwork and the office weasels sucking the boss off would drive any man to drink. A green Jeep pulled up beside me. The passenger inside glared at me. It was a man with a blank visage, a white face without eyes, a nose, or ears. Only a mouth. He stuck his tongue out at me and hissed. Its tongue was long, black, and sizzling. I floored the gas pedal trying to escape its gaze. "Oh, shit!" I yelled as I slammed on the brakes, almost running into the back of a taxi. The taxi driver yelled some unintelligible swear at me, waving his fist out the window. When I looked back, the creature was gone. It must have been from sleep deprivation. Lack of sleep can cause hallucinations, right? I arrived at the train station. The platform was silent. Not a single soul in sight. Strange for the station to be empty. Even if people weren't headed to Norcastle, the neighboring towns along the way were always flooded with people commuting. Many people worked in Drova, but at least half of them lived elsewhere in the adjacent cities like Innisbrook, Hillsborough, or Chesterfield. It was cheaper to live out there since Drova was the capital of the state, and most corporations wanted the prestige of having their HQ here. Most of the city dwellers were rich or eating stale government cheese. I scanned my ticket and took a window seat in coach. Coach was generally the place poor people sat, and if you didn't watch your stuff, someone might steal it. On a typical day, you'd see a bum in the back of the car sleeping with a newspaper over him and see crackheads twitching in the corners. My anxiety grew higher as I looked around and saw no one else around. I was happy that nobody else was here, but at the same time, it felt wrong. Steam came from off the sides as it started to move down the tracks. I was all alone. No attendants or staff in sight. I really could have used a whiskey or something to calm my nerves. It must have been a slow day. Trees and wildlife passed by the windows as the train rode full speed ahead. Drova to Norcastle was an 8-hour trip. I needed the sleep. It would help me think more clearly once I arrived home. I leaned back in my chair and opened a bottle of sleeping pills, taking 2. Twice the dose the bottle recommended, but I didn't care. I wanted to sleep the entire way. Most nights I would pop 2, and if I was feeling particularly spicy, I'd down them both with a cold beer. As I drifted off, I saw the same faceless creature from the car. It walked in toward me. It wore an attendant uniform, a blue coat with golden buttons going down from his forearm to his wrist. It reached out to me with his pale white palm. I tried to move, but the pills had me so tired I passed out before I could get away from him.
Welcome back, everyone, and this week I want to talk about the classic show, Are You Afraid of the Dark? They used to come on Nickelodeon. This is before everything got super political over there, or they basically made it the SpongeBob channel for quite a few years as far as I remember. But I'm a 90s kid at heart, and my first introduction to horror, except for Scream, of course, was Are You Afraid of the Dark? And I still love this show, but not all the episodes are perfect. And instead of cherry picking different episodes that I love just so I can gush about how great they were and how much they influenced me, I thought it would be a better idea to just start with episode 1 and move on through as if I was binge watching it on Netflix, which I'm not because it's not available on Netflix, I don't think. Not right now anyway. The way I'm watching this is via YouTube, but I have to use a VPN because I'm in America, and the only way you can watch Are You Afraid of the Dark on YouTube is if you're in Canada. So if you want to watch the show with me, you need to connect to Canada with your VPN. But anyway, let's get into this little episode called The Tale of the Phantom Cab. This is episode 1, season 1. And I have quite a few notes because I didn't know if I wanted to do this review of sort of like a general overview or I wanted to do a play-by-play. I don't want to make this segment 30 minutes or 40 minutes long like a Nostalgia Critic episode or something that already exists like that, because that would just be really long and probably boring. And you also can't see the video, so there's nothing to really reference. So what I'm doing with this is I have a list of notes that are sort of like general points that I want to get over, but I'll also go into some depth as a horror author and my critiques of it. Now, I know that you're probably thinking, this is a kid's show, and I'm going to just tear it apart for being bad in some episodes, and Honestly, I'm really not, because I really feel like a lot of Are You Afraid of the Dark is really underrated television, that it really could stand up against the greats like The Twilight Zone or Tales from the Crypt or American Horror Story or whatever other anthology series you like. But to me, Are You Afraid of the Dark was the best horror TV show, at least in the 90s and early 2000s. Not every episode was perfect, and honestly, I think The Phantom Cab was a terrible episode to start with. It really was just not a good episode, and we'll get into why now. The first thing I noticed was the intro music was actually missing. That usual music that you associate with it, with the little girls laughing and the sort of violin thing or whatever that noise is at the beginning. All of that's missing. It's just kind of silent. And you just hear little ambient sounds of what's going on screen, and you would think that would make it scarier, but it really does take away from the atmosphere like a lot. Like, the song really added a whole lot to this intro. But after the intro is over, they try to do like this Twilight Zone sort of intro where the leader of the Midnight Society basically introduces himself and says this line that I think is really weird, where he says, "We go to different schools and have different friends," which when I think about the 90s, it doesn't really make much sense, because at least where I lived, if you went to a different school, we probably didn't know you. And if you have this many members, I mean, how did you know them from all these different schools? I mean, what brought you together? So, I mean, it's a throwaway line, but it really is setting it up as sort of like these are like 7 strangers, or I'm not exactly sure how many, I didn't count, but these strangers all came together out in the middle of the woods to tell scary stories. It's just, as an opening, it makes no sense to me. You know, maybe it was different where you live. Maybe if you live in a city, you're a lot more exposed to the other school districts. But, I mean, it was shot in Canada, so no idea how they all sort of came together like that. I don't know why they even had that line. They could have just said, you know, we're all friends and we like to tell scary stories. But that's a bit of a nitpick. The reason I'm even going into it like this is because this is the foundation for the rest of the show. Like, this is the very first episode that starts the story of the entire series, which is sort of like one continuous piece, even though it's anthologies. So it's just a strange line in general. So the show starts, and there are 2 brothers that are walking around in the woods, and they get lost. And the first thing I must say, and I mean this in the best way possible, the younger brother's acting is horrendous. Even for a kid, he's just horrible. He nearly ruins the entire episode. He has this really bad deadpan way of delivering his lines. It's very awkward, it's clunky, it's really unnatural. It really sounds like he's reading off of cue cards. And I'm not trying to insult a child actor, I'm really not, but the best way I could explain it, if you haven't seen the episode, is if you've seen Star Wars Episode 1, the little kid that played Anakin Skywalker, imagine him, but even worse. And the reason I'm even bringing this up is because everyone else in the episode, including his older brother, are much better in the acting department. And there are a lot of episodes of this show where the kid actors are incredible. So comparing him against the other kids in the show, he was just terrible. I don't know why they even bothered. He must have been the director's kid or somebody that had to end with them when they were recording this thing. There's no way they picked this little kid and said, yeah, he's great. But maybe he did better stuff later on, but in this episode, he's terrible and he almost ruins the entire episode. If you replaced him with somebody else, you'll see that my ranking went up a little bit, but let's continue. Another thing that bugged me in the episode is they kept complaining about it being cold out there. They were walking around the woods and talked about how they were freezing, but there was no real signs of it being cold. There was no snow or frost, and you couldn't see their breath or anything that would, you know, show you that it was cold. But they kept making that a point. Like, it seemed like all the time, it's cold, it's cold, it's cold, I'm freezing, it's cold, come in from the cold. It's like, I mean, is it really that cold? I mean, they're not even shivering or, you know, trying to warm up. And they were dressed pretty heavily too, so that was a little bit weird. So you meet this guy in the woods named Flynn, and I'm gonna be real, Flynn really gives me pedo vibes. Like, I really think that he's the type of guy that would probably kidnap the kids, and, you know, I don't need to say the rest. This show is safe for work, but you get my point. And it doesn't help the fact that Flynn leads them to this creepy hovel out in the middle of the woods where we get to see one of the best actors and best parts of this entire show, which is Dr. Vink. But as I was watching it as an adult, I really got a lot of creepy sort of pedo, child kidnapping, child molestation vibes, and it really made me uncomfortable. And I doubt that's what they were thinking back then, but yeah. A little bit strange for a kid's show, especially with the way the guy was smiling and acting with them. So it gave me some really wrong vibes there. But the atmosphere is incredible. They do great with the lighting and the different, angles that they do, the little angles where it's sort of like the Silent Hill angle, I call it, where like the camera's sort of diagonal, it's kind of crooked and zoomed out. They do a lot of that. And I like how they had like the smoke coming off screen, which doesn't make sense if it's that cold. I mean, who has a fire going over there? But it had a neat little atmosphere going for it. And Dr. Vink is always a blast to watch, and he shows up in this episode as a mad scientist. And it's not my favorite Vink performance by far, but he does have that magic. And of course we go into the usual thing of I am not her nutbag, and it's Vink with the and all of that, but that's cool. But I thought his best performance, which we will eventually get to, which is one of the best episodes and probably one of the best horror stories of all time, The Tale of the Dangerous Soup is what I think it's called, but we'll get into that way later. That Tale of the Dangerous Soup was season 3, episode 13, so we have about a year until we're going to get to that if this show lasts that long. But maybe I'll bring it up as like a special Halloween thing and just jump ahead to pick my favorite episode of the show, and that's probably one of them. But anyway, they go in there, they see Vink, and they see his little mad science lair, and it's pretty cool. I mean, they really spent probably the most money of the episode on that. And one thing I just remembered was the guy that played Dr. Vink actually plays the Carney at the beginning of the Tale of Laughing in the Dark, the Zebo episode, the guy that's like shaved outside saying, pick the right door and you'll go free. That guy, that's the same guy that plays Dr. Vink. I guess he just shaved that week and they just said, well, we'll use him as something else. But that's also jumping ahead. That's not very far away, I don't think. But anyway, Vink does this thing twice in the episode that just really bugs me. And it's not that far apart when he does it either. When he lets the boys into his little hovel, or whatever you want to call his little house that looks like it came straight out of Lord of the Rings, he just stares at the camera for like 5 seconds after he lets those two in, and it's just really not even creepy, which I think is what they were going for, but it kind of breaks the immersion because you're never supposed to stare at the camera like that. And he did it again not even 2 minutes later when they're in the house and he's drinking some type of smoking drink. He just like is staring at the camera again. I'm like, is he lost? Does someone forget to edit this part out? I mean, what's going on? Why is he looking at the camera like that? That's cut. That's what I was thinking. But anyway, Vink says you must solve a riddle, and if you get the answer right, he'll call your parents, and your parents come pick you up out in the middle of the woods, I guess. I don't know how they would know how to find Vink's house, but that's what he said. So the riddle is, what is weightless? You can see it, and you can put it in a barrel, and it makes the barrel lighter. And one thing I never noticed, which kind of made me just a little bit, I wouldn't say irritated, but I'll say a little bit like, really? I mean, are you serious? Was Vink takes the top off the barrel and he's like pointing at the hole, obviously pointing at the hole on top of the barrel. And he gave them the answer, but they just don't get it. They're just like both staring at him. And he's just like pointing at that hole, like, right here, hole. And I feel like Vink really just wanted this whole cycle to be over. Like, he's just like, he was doing the best he could to give him the answer, but they just couldn't get it. And that's going to come in a little bit later, where you'll see why that's kind of annoying. So they get the riddle wrong and don't know what it is. So Vink tells them to get out, and he tells them that there will be a taxi that'll pick them up and take them back to town. So taxi shows up, they get in the back. Turns out Flynn's the driver. Flynn basically tells them that he drives this route every night, and what he does is, for anyone who doesn't solve Vink's riddle, he crashes into a tree and kills them, because that's how he died. Which is just another thing that I have to point out that makes no sense, because do that many people really come out to Vink's house that often, like every night, or does he just crash into the tree every night because I guess it feels good? I know I'm nitpicking a kid's show, but you need to understand something. There are episodes of this show that are god tier horror material that belong up there with Stephen King or Clive Barker, or even your mainline, like, Jason, Freddy, Michael stuff. This is not one of them, but this is supposed to be their best foot forward, and so far it's been pretty lousy, and I was not exactly excited to watch this episode again. which I believe is going to be completely changed in episode 2 if the thumbnail does it any justice, because that's actually a really scary looking thumbnail. But we'll get into that one next week. But anyway, so they're driving along, and Flynn says, well, you still got time to solve the riddle. And the boy inevitably says, it's a hole, it's a hole, it's a hole. It's kind of silly. But they solve the riddle, cab disappears, park ranger shows up, they're saved, they go back to town, Vink disappears forever, and, you know, his little hovel is nothing but just like a rock foundation, apparently. He shows up in later episodes, but for the sake of this story, he never shows up again. Overall rating, 5 out of 10. This one disappoints me that this is their best foot forward. That if I was a kid or someone that was trying to get into the series and just wanted to start from the beginning, if I saw this episode first and didn't know anything about the rest of them, I'd probably never watch the show again. It's just not good. If they had a different kid play the younger brother, it might have been a 6 at best. It really was convoluted. It was weak. And it just felt like they were just sort of throwing 2 or 3 different stories together, trying to make something 30 minutes. But overall, at best, I give it a 6. The concept is kind of neat, but they just didn't execute it well at all. Luckily, in future episodes, you will see that they remedied that really quick. Starting with episode 2, which I will review next week, called The Tale of the Lonely Ghost. And it has probably the scariest looking thumbnail I've ever seen. Also, Laughing in the Dark is episode 3. I didn't know that, but that's probably known as the scariest episode of the entire show. That's the one with Zebo. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful Friday night, or whatever night you're listening to this show. Sweet dreams, everyone.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to follow us, go to terrortracks.com/follow. Also, please check out our Patreon, where you can get cool merch, writing lessons, and other awesome rewards starting at $5 a month at patreon.com/terrortracks. See you next week. Goodbye for now.